APA style. What's APA style? Anybody know? It is a standard writing format, okay? With the idea that when we do stuff, we're all doing it the same way. APA is what's used in education and psychology. MLA is used in, I think, history. There's another format called Chicago. But the idea being that everybody's following the same format. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, I am not an expert on APA. When I did my dissertation, I had no clue what the rules were for APA. But my person who was doing the editing for me, he literally told me what to fix, but he never told me why I was doing it the way I did it, so I really never learned it then. But I've learned it since. But this is, as best as I know APA, I think I'm right. I'm fairly certain that I'm right on what I'm going to teach you, because it's worked over the years. But if you know better that I've done something incorrectly, I want you to let me know that so that I make sure that I'm doing it right. But the only way you can prove it to me is to show me out of the APA style guide where I went wrong. Okay? I will not take the word of another faculty member in the teacher education department. Because one of the things you'll hear is a faculty member saying, I want you to do it in APA, and you better be doing this way. And then you'll be like, well, Perkins said that's not the way it's supposed to be done. Well, first off, don't go to that person and say, but Perkins said, because that won't get you anywhere other than get them a little ticked off at you as they're getting ready to grade your paper. Not a good thing. So, but if they tell you, do it this way, even though it contradicts something else you know, do it their way. Make life easier, do it their way. But for me, I think I'm right, and so I'm going to go with that. So, with APA, why do we do APA? Yeah, it's standard, but why is it important that you, as teacher education students, are doing this? Let's go with the first one, because my teacher said I had to. Okay, but there's a couple of other reasons. Actually, I got three. Reason number one, if you don't properly give credit where you got information from, you are plagiarizing. That is an honor code violation, and you could be turned into the honor code. We don't want to go there. Reason number two, as I said, a standard so that we're all doing things the same way. And then reason number three is the information you're providing in your citations provide information to the person who's reading your paper. If you write a paper and you've credited somebody with saying this, and the person reading your paper goes like, I'd like to know more, then they can go between the citation you have in your paper and the list you have on your research your reference page, and go and find the original article. So it has purpose besides just keeping you out of the honor code jail. We don't want you going there. So, with that, citations there's two parts to APA style. The citation in the paper itself and the reference page. And so we're going to cover all of that as we go. So, if you got the idea from somebody, you have to cite it somehow. If you don't, you plagiarize. Even if you're not quoting them, if you learned about, and let's go with Bloom's taxonomy, you learned about Bloom's taxonomy, and you mentioned Bloom's taxonomy, and what you think about the evaluation part of Bloom's taxonomy, technically, you should be citing that in your paper. Where did you read that? Where did you learn about that? We don't get to that serious level, but just know that it could go there. As far as how do you cite somebody, there's two ways. Paraphrasing what they said and directly quoting what they said. Paraphrasing is actually the preferred because we don't want you necessarily using their words. We want you putting it in your words so that you can demonstrate your understanding of what it was you were actually saying. Now, that doesn't mean that if you paraphrase and you get it wrong, that somebody's going to come down on you. You're putting it in your terms, but that's okay. But occasionally, there'll be something that's just so perfect to start with. Paraphrasing is just, I'm going to ruin it if I do that. It's that strong. And so that's when you use direct quotations. And in your paper itself, there's a difference in how you cite paraphrased information from quoted information. So that's where we're going to go next. Some general things here. In the paper itself, the entire paper, no first names are used when you're talking about the authors of things. Now, occasionally you'll have an author who is going in and observing a teacher in the classroom. That author is writing about the teacher. I'm tolerant of first names in that situation, but the author themselves, you should not be using any first names. It should always be initials. Even if you went to the article and they put the first names there, you're always going to use initials for first and middle name. And the reason behind that is we don't want somebody prejudging the information based on something you got out of their first name. You might get ethnic background, you might get cultural background, you might get gender background. We don't want somebody qualifying what they're reading based on some other kind of stereotyping.
So you only have to do the initials if there's the possibility that two different authors have the same last name? Or
initials all the time.
Initial all the time.
But the initials are only on the reference page.
Okay.
There's no initials, and that's an excellent point. What you're referring to is, let's say I've got Johnny Jones in 1972 who writes something, and Susie Jones who wrote something in 1981, and I've got them both listed on my reference page. If I can't distinguish in my citation in the paper itself, it's just going to be Jones. And in this case, the year. Well, with that, I'll be able to distinguish between Johnny and Susie. But if Johnny Jones wrote something in 1979 and Susie Jones wrote something in 1979, year is not going to distinguish that. At that point, I'm putting the initials in the paper itself as part of the citation. But that's going to be an exception, and it's really fairly rare.
Okay.
Fairly rare. So in the paper itself, unless it's an exception like that, no initials, it's just last names. Just last names. You will never, ever, in your paper, put Bob Perkins. First of all, we told you no Bob, no B. But you'll never put Perkins stated in his article feeding cats on a vegetarian diet. Okay? You never put the title of the article in the paper. The idea is that stuff is on the reference page. It doesn't need to inflate the paper itself. So no titles in the paper itself. So typically it's not mentioned what the source is. You will not say Perkins in his article, Technology in the Social Studies. And I've crossed on through that. That would not be in there. And it will cost you points if I'm doing APA style grading, which for your article reviews I am. As far as what should be on the reference page, if you cite it in the paper, it has to be also on the reference page, listed on the reference page. If you list it on the reference page, it has to be cited in the paper. There has to be a one-for-one there. If you bother to put it in one place, it's got to be in the other. This is not an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is you got an assignment from a teacher and they said, go find all the articles that you can on such and such topic. Well, you found the articles, but you're not using them with an annotated bibliography. This is not that. These are things you actually did use You're not going to incorporate everything you did researching for the paper you're writing, and I'm talking about a 25-page paper. I'm not talking about my article summary. But for that 25-page paper, you might have used a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, who didn't turn their phone off? One of my colleagues in the computer science department, I went to a presentation that he did, and he had a rule in his class that if your phone went off like that, he answered it. And then while he was doing his presentation, his phone went off. But I found out later it was a plan. He set it up that way. But that could be awful embarrassing in the middle of class. That was my son. And he could be awful embarrassing, just saying. So, got to be a one-for-one. If it's on the reference page, there has to be a citation in the paper. If it's cited in the paper, it's got to be in the reference page. For your article summaries, we're going to do overkill with this. There's only going to be one thing listed on your reference page, but I'm going to make you do the citations in the paper, even though it's overkill. Because again, I want you to be practicing the APA style things. So just know that. If it's cited, it must be in the reference page. Okay, so components of a citation. Basically, there's 3 possible parts as far as what goes into a citation. And just a quick note here, I'm using slides to do this, but the same thing applies to PowerPoint. One of the things that you don't want to do whenever you're using one of these slide presentation programs is to just dump a screen full of information on people. Because what are they doing? What do your students do when you dump a screen full of information on them? Frantically writing it down. Okay? Where you don't get to, you can talk about it, but nobody's listening to you. And so with this, I use animation to bring it in, just one line or one phrase at a time, so that you can write it down if you want to. The bottom line is there's going to be a link to this whole PowerPoint that you can get to anyways. And you can listen to the video later on if you want to. But anyways, for a citation, there's 3 possible components. The author's name, or names, depending on how many there are, the year, and page number. All 3 of these, each of these 3 things has its own rules as to if it appears and how it appears. So each one has its own rules. There's rules covering the author's name, there's different rules covering the year, there's different rules covering the citation. Going with author's name, you have to put the author's names there somehow. It can appear one of 2 ways. You might put the author's name as part of your sentence. In that case, there won't be any parentheses around the author's name. Or you might mention that, let's go with, because there's a general theme in here about teaching cats stuff. They got contradict. Anybody watch America's Got Talent? They had some cats, trained cats this year, which who knew you could train cats? But anyways, this is based on it's foolish to try and train cats, the theme that I used. So it may be a statement in there that says it's foolish to train cats. And that statement was made by Perkins in an article done da-da-da-da-da. In that case, Perkins was not part of the sentence. It would be in parentheses. But if the sentence says, Perkins stated that you can't train cats, then Perkins is not going to appear in parentheses in that sentence. It's already, the author's name is already in the sentence itself. So that's with the author. And we'll get into multiple authors. When you've got multiple authors, if the author's names are in the sentence, the last 2 are separated by the word and. If they're in parentheses, the last 2 are separated by the ampersand sign. On to year. The rule for year is that it appears the first time that item, in this case, this particular article, is cited in a paragraph. But if you cite that item in the same paragraph again, the year does not appear. But then if you move on to the next paragraph, the first time it's cited in that new paragraph, the year appears again. So the rule on year is it's a paragraph by paragraph thing. First time in a paragraph it appears, but all other times in that particular paragraph it does not appear. And then page number. Page number is there only if it's a direct quotation. You're quoting word for word what they said. And there's two kinds of quotations. Normal quotation that we know about, put quotation marks around it, and we recognize that as a quotation. But in APA style, there's something called a block quotation, and that's a quotation that's longer than 40 words. And it's got a special way that it's done. And I'll talk about that later. So, these are the three components that you can have in a citation. As I said, last name appears only if it's in the sentence, it's outside of the parentheses, but if it's not part of the sentence, then it is inside of parentheses. If it was Perkins said so-and-so, then the parentheses would actually be around the 2013. Year appears the first time in a paragraph, but no other times in the paragraph. The only exception here is, let's say I've got two articles by the same person, Perkins, but one of those was in 2013, one of those was in 2017. I need to know which Perkins article I'm talking about in the paper. The exception here is if you've got that situation where same person but two different years, you got to put the year in every time. But it's an exception again. And then page number only if it's a direct quotation. So, if there are two authors, multiple authors are a fairly common thing. If there are two, you list both of them all the time. If it's part of the sentence, the two will be separated by and. But if it's not part of the sentence, the two will be separated by an ampersand. So that's the rule there. This is two authors. And with two authors, you're going to put them both in every time. Every time. As far as the order that the authors are showing up here, you do not change that order. Okay? When you read the article, that article was written by Jones and Smith. You don't change that order. Depending on the actual field, some fields, education being one, the person whose name is first in line did most of the work. So they're getting more credit for doing that. But there are some fields where it's actually backwards with that. I think some of the sciences do it that way. Not our problem, because we're in education. If there are 3 through 6 authors, they're all listed the very first time that you cite them, but then all other times it's the first author followed by et al., meaning and others. Because, again, we don't want the whole paper to be you writing the author's names over and over again. And it's common to have 3 or more. Now, this is 3 authors through 6 authors. If you go beyond 6, right from the get-go, it's first author et al. Every time. On your reference page, always you'll list all of them. But in the paper itself, when you're doing your citations, that's where these rules kick in. And feel free to stop and ask questions along the way. Occasionally, you're not going to run into it with this because what you're doing for me is an article summary. You're not doing a research paper, so you're not going to have multiple authorships, okay? But occasionally, if you're doing a true research paper, you're writing that 25-page paper for Professor X, and you found 3 articles that all said the same thing. First off, that's a good thing, because the more experts you can get saying it, the stronger the claim is. But you'd want to give the citations for that, and so it would look like this. Perkins, comma, 2017. What's new here is the semicolon to separate the different items that you're citing. So we've got one by Perkins, we've got one by Smith, and we got another one by Jones and Baker. What do you notice about that? That last line. Something's a little out of kilter. Be brave.
Only a few of the page numbers?
Pardon me?
Only a few of the authors' names have page numbers?
It's not page numbers. Although the 2004, I mean the 204 looks like that. That should be 2014. That's my mistake for throwing you off on that one. So knowing now that it's 2014, what's the difference? Not all of them do. Why? Smith does not have a year with it. The other 2 do. Which one? You're almost there. You said in the paper, in the paragraph. Okay? Year is one that follows paragraph by paragraph rule. And with that example that I gave you, this is the first time in this paragraph I've talked about the Perkins article. This is the first time I've talked about the Jones and Baker article. But I've already talked about the Smith article in this paragraph. So that year thing, even though we're putting it in lumped together with 2 other authors, that year rule is still following. And so you could have a mix and match with a multiple situation like that. Yes?
So just going back with like the years and stuff, so like when you just like say like in the first example it just has them in the sentence of Jones and Smith, parentheses 2010, and so if you use that same kind of like citation again, you don't have to put the 2010 to have the same paragraph.
If it's in the same paragraph. If it's in the same paragraph. Yeah, the year is following the paragraph. The first time in any paragraph, I have to put the year, but any other times I put that one in that paragraph, no year. And so literally you'll have some with the year and some without. But it's because we've got those 3 things, and again, I go back to the 3 things. The author has its separate set of rules, the year has its separate set of rules, and page number has its separate set of rules. Okay, occasionally, in this case, I have an article written by Smith in my hand. And Smith, in their article, have cited and referenced Jones. And they credit Jones with saying something, and I like what Jones said. So I want to put what Jones said in my paper. Okay? Does everybody understand the scenario there? I've got Smith in my hand. I do not have the Jones article in my hand. I have the Smith article in my hand. But Smith is citing Jones, and I like what it appears that Jones has said. Now, the problem is, I don't know if Smith understood anything about what Jones said. I'm going by what Smith has said in their article. That's the one I got in my hand. Now, this is a situation where you still want to cite it properly. And remember, again, Smith is the one we've got in our hand. The best thing you can do if you want to start quoting Jones is go find the Jones article. Okay, that's the best thing. But you may not be able to do that. You'll find out that at College of Charleston, we don't have access to every journal in the world. And the Jones article may be in a journal we don't have. So this, as I said, is the best option, but it's not an option that I can do. So I'm faced with, I've still got the Smith article here. I've got what Smith thinks Jones said. And so I want to properly cite that. The way it is done, I'm citing Jones. Remember, Jones is the one I don't have. Smith is the one I do have. And so I'm putting in parentheses, as cited in Smith, 2004. Now, first off, the 2004 is the year for the Smith article, not the Jones article. And in fact, we don't worry about the year for the Jones article. We don't have it in our hands. We could extrapolate that out of the reference page from the Smith article, but we're not going to do that. Okay? We're using the Smith article. Now, what do we know about the Smith article, given what's in front of you? We've been down this road already. 2004. It's the first time we've cited the Smith article in this paragraph. Okay? The year thing is still going on. Still going on. So if this was the second time that we had cited, even though we're doing Jones here, if it was the second time, there wouldn't be any year here. That year thing is following no matter what else is going on. That year rule is still following. Your reference page. Some general rules. First off, in your paper, we're indenting the first line of a paragraph by ½ an inch. On your reference page, it's exactly the opposite. The first line goes to the margin. The second and other lines for that one reference will be indented to ½ inch. And I'll tell you later on how to do that. Okay? But the way it will look is exactly the opposite the way a paragraph looks. The difference between first line and the other lines. As I mentioned, no first or middle names. And you don't have to worry about finding the middle initial if they provided it in the article title or the information that you have in front of you. Put the initials in there. But if you don't find it, that's okay too. It may be that they don't have a middle name. But if you have that information, you put the initials in there. Your reference page is listed alphabetically by the first author's last name. I told you the first author in the case of education stuff is probably the one who did the most work, and so we're not going to change up the order for the article by author name, but whoever the first author is, that's what we're going to use to alphabetize the list on our reference page. So, the way books will look, it's going to be author's last name, comma, first initial, period, space, if you got it, middle initial, period, space, in parentheses, the year, period, the title of the work. The title of the work, some things to note here. First off, book titles are italicized. Go back. So the title is italicized. The other thing to note is capital letters. Don't use capital letters the way they did in the article. They may have done it improperly. Capital letters here are going to be the first letter of the title. If there's a colon, the first letter after the colon. No other capitals. And then I had a student one time who had a book, and I don't remember what the exact title of the book was, but the word Mississippi was in the book's title. And so based on the rules that I just gave you, the first letter of the title, the first letter after the colon, that person decided Mississippi shouldn't get capitalized. Mississippi is a proper name, it gets capitalized. Okay, so those kinds of rules that are already out there are still in play. So capitalize Mississippi, just say. Place here is typically going to be a city and state for the publishing company, and then whoever the publisher might be. And so that would look like this. So we got Perkins, comma, RF, ampersand, Burke, WQ, parentheses, the year, 2014, using technology to teach your cat, and again the capital letters, and then published Boston, Massachusetts by Pearson Publishing. If you've got multiple authors here, it's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, comma, the second author's name, and the ampersand's taking care of the last two that are there. So that's a book. Journal articles. With this, we've got the author and year, same kind of thing happening. But then we've got the article's title, and then if there's a subtitle with a colon separating it. But notice no italics on the title of this one. The italics are reserved for the journal's name. Now in the journal's name, contrary to what a book does, notice with the book title, only the first letter in the title and the first letter after a colon was capitalized. In the journal name, the entire journal name, every word, except for the A, the kind of thing, but every word is going to have the first letter capitalized. And then that will be followed by volume number and issue number, and then parentheses, pages. And I'm thinking pages was not something we covered a little bit ago. Remind me to make sure that I do that before we stop this. Okay. I showed you Eric last week. Eric is an excellent way to find articles for this process that I've got you in. It's my preferred way. I demand you use Eric to find what you're finding. However, it kind of confuses the issue a little bit. Does everybody remember I showed you the difference between Eric documents and journals? There is a difference, okay? And so pay attention to that with this next, or just kind of think of that as we're talking through this next bunch of stuff. I'm making you use Eric to be a location tool to find articles for you. But Eric also does a separate thing. Sometimes it will provide that article for you. The Eric documents, it's definitely the provider of that. But journals that you find in Eric are available other ways. And so the fact that you used Eric does not necessarily mean it was found by you electronically. If you printed it out, or if you actually went to the shelves in the library, you could literally pull some of the journals off of the shelf. Okay? And so the electronic part of this, the things that I got in parentheses here, that may or may not be happening even if you're using Eric to do this. I'll talk about that in just a second, show you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay? But the bottom line here is Eric documents. I'm going to cover that second. And then true journal articles. This is talking about true journal articles, that the journal has a name. The difference within ERIC itself, ERIC documents are going to have a number that starts with ED. Journal articles are going to have a number that starts with EJ. If it starts with EJ, ignore the number totally and deal with it as a journal article, because it truly is. They'll provide the journal name and all of the citation information for you. So deal with it as a journal article. Journal name is there, volume, issue, and the pages that article took up in that journal. And for my purposes in here, I am quite comfortable with you not putting the electronic information for those journal articles that you find. Okay? For me, it's an optional thing. It's truly required if the journal's only available online, which some journals are currently. But for me, the information's optional, because anybody reading your paper, as long as you've got that first line of information, they can find the article. Whether they have access to ERIC, because if they're not a College of Charleston student or faculty member, they don't have access to our library. They don't have access to our searching tools with ERIC. And so we want to give them, even though they're outside the College of Charleston, the capability of looking for that article on their own wherever they happen to be. So I'm not worried about the electronic part of this. I will not take off points if you don't put this electronic part of this as part of your reference. I'm quite comfortable with that. Okay, so if you've got that, it should not be ERIC. If you'll remember when I showed you ERIC the other day, there was a government version and there was an EBSCO version. It should not be EBSCO. EBSCO does not hold the copyright to those articles. It would be the actual journal's name. So the way the reference page is going to look here is why shouldn't you teach your cat? Again, we've got the capitalization situation going on here. We've got the journal italicized and capital letters for each of the words. And then volume and issue. Volume is the number outside of the parentheses. Issue is the number inside the parentheses. And just so you know what that means, volume is whatever their year is. And so, for instance, a journal that's been published for 20 years, and they're still publishing in 2018, their volume, that first number, is going to be 20, their year 20. Issue is within the year. Are they quarterly? Then there'll only be 4 issues. Are they monthly? There'll be 12 issues. Bi-monthly? There'll be 6 issues. And so you're going with the volume number and the issue number. ERIC's pretty good about providing that information when you find the listing in ERIC, so you should be able to find it from that. And if you've got full text, typically that's going to be on the full text of the article as well. And then in Volume 1, Issue 1, this article took up pages 16 through 21. That's what that number means. Notice no P period. It's automatically assumed that that last piece of information is the page numbers. Now, one place where this may not show up, there may not be information for page numbers here, is if it's truly an article that is solely available online. Because when you print out pages from a solely electronic version, most of the time you haven't got any control over where the page breaks happen. So there may not be page numbers listed for a fully online version of an article. The full text ones that come out of ERIC, typically those are based on what the original printed journal article was and will have page numbers. But if it's just a solely online journal, there's a possibility that there's not going to be any page numbers. And then, as I said, the electronic citation there. is optional. Jumping back to Eric, I want to really stress again, Eric will find two kinds of documents. And let me just kind of do a quick sidelight to Eric. So that I can tell you exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm going to the library, going to the databases, E for Eric, and we got two versions of Eric. And as I said, I like the EBSCO one, so I just typically just use that one. And so we'll give it a nice generic topic to do a search. And I didn't do anything to narrow things down. And so you can see that this one is an an academic journal. There's the number I was talking about. If it starts with EJ, it's a journal. Ignore that number, deal with it as a journal. Use the process of citing a journal article. Okay? Let's see if we can find something that's not a journal. Because I did not specify which one I wanted. And now I'm going to specify. So I'm going to tell that I just want ERIC documents. With an ERIC document, it's going to have that number with it. Yes?
So on this database, you can go in and have it cite this and citation. Is that like a correct format?
I would, yeah, okay, maybe.
It's like if you click it to cite this and then it has like all of the different forms. So I didn't know if that was like something.
That's fine. What I would do is double check and make sure that you're still meeting my rules, because they don't know if this is the first time you put it in a paragraph. Yes?
Okay, so if it is a journal article found through ERIC, do you include a link to that
I would not.
site? Okay, so you
I
don't
would
have
not.
to do that.
I
Okay.
would not. And the what I did notice is that it's still saying this is an academic journal, but I'm going to go with this. Ignore this. And it's saying academic journal, and I was just flying by those things because that's what I was doing the quick scan for. This is the important piece here, whether it's an academic journal. The fact that this is ED, there may not be a website I can go to get it other than ERIC. So this one's going to be cited based on it being an ERIC document. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. Going back to your question about extracting the citation that they've got there, I'm going to guess they're talking more about what would go on the reference page. That probably is right.
Okay.
But again, I'd double check it just to make sure, but it probably is right. But they would have no way of knowing whether this is the first time you put it in a paragraph. I'm just thinking of some of the other rules that we did. The year thing covers that. They're not going to know whether or not you're quoting it or paraphrasing it. So you're going to be on your own for the citations in the paper.
Okay.
But they're probably going to be okay with copying and pasting that on the reference page.
Okay. Sorry for another question.
There's no need to apologize for asking questions.
Do we need to do?
Unless you've already asked two.
Do we need to do the cover page?
No.
For this?
For this, I do not require a cover page. I do not require running head, and I'm not showing you any of that stuff.
Okay.
I'm going to let you at the mercy of whoever the faculty member is that you're trying to make happy on that one. I don't go into that with this. And the reason that I don't do it is that's really, truly overkill in some situations. But if they told you to do it, do it.
Okay.
However they told you to do it. Okay, so with ERIC documents, if it comes up with an ED number, and you may have, like I did, purposely search for ERIC documents, as far as what you do for me, I don't care whether it's ERIC documents or True Journals. I suggest True Journals if you can find them, just because of the quality factor in there, but I'm okay with it not being. Because of this particular article that came up here, for our purposes, this is not a cultural education class or a comparative education class. I would suggest not using journal articles that are written about situations outside of the United States. You need to get comfortable with what can happen in your own classroom. And so this is not a slam on schools outside of the United States, but more than likely, you're going to be teaching in the United States, and what happens in a school in Turkey is not necessarily going to be what happens in a classroom in the United States. So I think for the purposes of this, focus on not going with outside the States. If you truly want to know, truly want to do that, that's fine. But don't just take that Turkish article because it's the first one that came up. That's my suggestion. Okay, so ERIC document. I'm going to go through the process on that in just a second. But coming back to, I'm going to switch this off from an ERIC document to an academic journal. Okay, and I am going to take the first one that I found after I told you don't. I'm going to go for the full text of this article. Okay? And electronically, where is this article located? In ERIC. Okay? ERIC is not your source for this. Yeah, you found it using ERIC. Okay? But I don't want you to discard all the journal information and treat this as a website and use that as your location. Okay? It's not. Yes, it is where you're going to get the full text version of it. You use ERIC to find it, but ERIC does not hold the copyright to this. This is where we want to make sure that we're giving credit where credit is due. And so that's why I want to make sure you're citing the International Journal of Instruction, Volume 11, Number 2, and using that as your reference. Now, this goes back to your question. Can I copy that and say it's good? In fact, if you copy this one, it's not good. What's wrong with it? From an APA style. We would not have month in there. Year is not located there in our true reference. Year is after the author. We would have Hussein, I, period. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce, but it'll be comma, O, period, comma. They've got semicolons in here. And no ampersand for the last one, or and. We don't have volume, V for volume number. That is the volume. So 11 is going to be outside of parentheses. We don't have N in there. We would have parentheses around the 2 to indicate that that's the number. So they're not, for this particular article, they're not using APA style. What you saw someplace else, they may have changed it in that. But what's in front of me right now does not match APA style. So be aware of that. But because this one is a journal, if you put this information in the proper format, we can ignore electronically where it came from. It's all good. It's all good. If we were to go to the full text, again, I'm still seeing ERIC here. I would not take that as the electronic location of this. Because in order to use that, you're going to have to be a College of Charleston faculty member or student to get to our system to do that. It may be that if you're at Coastal Carolina and in their library system and using ERIC on their library system, that may work, but I can't guarantee that, so I'm not using it. But if you do use all of the information we're seeing here, and this, if you truly want to use an electronic as well, that would be the address, because that's who's holding the copyright on that particular article. Okay, pick up where we left off. So how do we deal with ERIC documents then? We're taking care of the journal part of things, but we haven't taken care of ERIC documents. Okay? ERIC documents, the problem with an ERIC document is what it is can be a variety of things. We know what an article is, we know what a book is, but what is actually uploaded to ERIC can be pamphlets, brochures, government reports, grant reports. There's a whole myriad of things that it can be. And so that's why the ERIC document number is the important piece for us to find it. I will guarantee you that every institution, college institution in the United States has access to ERIC somehow. And so all they need is that ERIC document number, the ED and the 6 digits afterwards, to find that article. So the process here is author, year. With ERIC documents, there's the potential for there being no year on that report. Okay? Be comfortable with that if that's the case. Depending on what it is, there may or may not be a title to this thing. And it may be just as simple as Department of Education report number 14. Whatever it is, it's all good. The critical piece here is the ERIC document number. And so this will look like this. Again, there's some variation on the year, whether or not it has one. There's some variation on the title, whether or not it's got one. You know, work with whatever you find, but the critical piece of information here is that ED number and the 6 digits that come with it. Because somebody who's looking at your citations, that's what they're going to work with. With ERIC documents in particular, author may not be a person. It might be a department. It may be an agency. There's some variety there. Some resources for you. First off, I've only talked about articles and books and ERIC documents. But literally, APA style, if you go to the APA style guide, I think version 6 is the one, 6th edition is the one that's current, you can go there and you can find how to cite whatever it is you're talking about. You can cite me talking in this class. There's a way to do that. But I'm not going to try and cover all of these ways. If you've got something special like that you want to do a citation for, best thing for you to do is to go to that 6th edition of the publication manual. Other resources, the first one here, OWL at Purdue University, is fantastic. I think I've got a link on my website to it, but that's the link there. And if I don't already have it, this presentation, there's going to be a link to it on today in the calendar itself. But that's an excellent site to go to because you can find a lot of these really obscure kinds of things that you're trying to cite. And then I've never used this one from Radford University. I found a link to it sometime, and so I added it in. The one thing that I noticed was not in here is direct quotations. The only thing that's different is if you took it word for word in your paper, you need to put a quotation marks around it. And in the citation, you need to add that third thing. P, period, and whatever page number that came from in that document. Now, I will say with ERIC documents, if that's your source, you may run into a hard time finding a page number on it. If it was an electronic-only version, it may not have a page number on it, but if you don't put page number on something, direct quotation that you put on there, I'm going to take off points for it, and you're going to have to prove to me that there was no page number on the original document for you to put there. If you can prove that to me, we're good. We're good, as I said. I don't want to take off points and be wrong, but all of these things are going to hit you up along the way. A little bit of editing, parentheses. These tend to confuse people as to where should the parentheses go, how do other punctuation work around the parentheses, how do spaces work around parentheses. Well, first off, I tend to myself do one of two things with my citation parentheses. We'll talk parentheses in general in a minute. My citation parentheses, if I'm citing an article like this and the author's information is not in the sentence, I tend to put the citation at the end of the sentence. That's just the way I do it. However, if I had Perkins said it's obvious that it's not healthy for you to try and train a cat, instead of having that full set of parentheses there, I would literally put it right after Perkins, right after the author. I'm going to put year there. I'm going to put page number if it's a quotation. I'm going to put year there if it's the first time in the paragraph, but I'm not going to put the author's name in the parentheses. So those are my general rules. If the author's name is in the sentence, I'll put the parentheses right after. If the author's name is not in the sentence, I put it at the end. That's just how I've done it. I don't fault anybody if they do differently. I will fault you if you put Perkins and Burke said, and then put Perkins and Burke in here too. Because one counts out the other. There doesn't need to be duplicity there. Parentheses in general, space in front of the parentheses. If it's at the end, your punctuation for your sentence is after the parentheses. I see a lot of people who will put the punctuation inside the parentheses. Parentheses and then the last thing, whatever ends your sentence. Quotation marks, spaces after punctuation, kind of thing. In quotation marks, there is no space between the the quotation mark and the first letter. There is no space there after. And if the quotation marks are at the end of your sentence, the punctuation goes inside the quotation marks, not after the quotation marks. And I literally had Dr. Kozart, who's an English teacher, sitting in here, and I said, I'm right, Dr. Kozart, please. I'm right? Yep, you're right. Spaces between initials, my initials are RFP. It would be Perkins, comma, R, period, space, or F, period, space, P, period. So put the space between the middle and the first initial. This is a Word and Google Docs. If you don't do this in both programs, the default is for it to either add a space before a paragraph starts or add a space after a paragraph starts. And what that means is you end up with extra spaces in between paragraphs along the way. In both of them, there's a feature to remove spaces after the paragraph, remove spaces before the paragraph. If you get some really weird spacing going on, what I do, and I go to see, can I remove the spaces, and it's not offering me that? What I'll tell it to do is to add spaces before the paragraph and then follow that up with remove the spaces before the paragraph. Because what's happening is some have it and some don't. If I do a select all, add the space before the paragraph, remove the space before the paragraph, add the space after the paragraph, remove the space after the paragraph, I mean literally. Select all, add, remove, add, remove. That cleans up the whole thing.